Erev Tov, good evening, everyone. We are going to be learning in the Zera Shimshon's commentary to the Haggadah. If you have the Sefer, you'll find his comments on the Haggadah after Parshas Bo, and we're going to be doing Drush Hey, section number 5. Before we start the section, we're going to take a look at a few psukim from the Bris Bein HaBesorim, where Hashem tells Avram about what's going to happen to the Jewish people in the future and how they'll be enslaved in a land not their own, and how ultimately they'll come out of that land b'rechush gadol with great wealth. So this is Parshas Lech Lecha in Bereshis, Perek Tes Vav, Psukim Yud Beis through Yud Dalet. Vayehi Hashemesh lavo, and it was time for the sun. The sun was about to set. V'sardema nafla al Avram, and a deep weariness or a type of sleep fell on Avram, a tiredness, fatigue. V'hine ema chashecha gedola, and behold, there was a great fear of the darkness, nofeles Allah, that fell on him, on Avram. Vayomer la'Avram, and Hashem said to Avram, Yodoa teda, you should certainly know, Ki ger yiyezaracha be'eretz lo lahem, that your descendants will be strangers in a land that does not belong to them. Va'avadum ve'inu osam, and they will be enslaved and they will be afflicted. Arba meo shana, for 400 years. V'gam es hagoy asher ya'avodu, and also the nation that they serve, don anochi, I will judge. And afterwards they will go out with great wealth. So we'll see that these three psukim are going to play, at least some of the words in these three psukim are going to play an important role in this section, Drush Hey, section 5 in the Zera Shimshon. Let us begin. So the Zera Shimshon begins with the quote of the Vihisha Amda from the Pesach Haggadah, and to translate the words, Vihi and it, referring to the promise that Hashem made to Avram at the Bris Bein HaBesarim, at the covenant of the pieces, from which we just read a few psukim. That promise has stood for our forefathers, Vilanu, and for us, Shelo Echad Bilvad Omar Aleinu Lechalosenu, because it was not only one, meaning one enemy who stood upon us to destroy us, Ela Shebachol Dor Vador Omdim Aleinu Lechalosenu, but in every generation they stand against us to destroy us. VeHaKadosh Baruch Hu Matzilenu Miyadam, and Hashem saves us from their hands. So now the Zera Shimshon starts with a question. Hikshe hazevach Pesach. The question is asked in the Sefer Zevach Pesach, which, by the way, is the commentary from the Abarbanel, the great Spanish sage, the Abarbanel, 15th century great Spanish rabbi who wrote a commentary on many things, but this is his commentary on the Haggadah. So he asked the following question. Even though it's definitely true that our forefathers were saved because of the promise that was made at the Bris Bein HaBesarim, the Ka'amar La'el, as it says a little previously in the Haggadah, meaning a little bit before the Vihisha Amda, it says, Baruch Shomer Haftachaso Yisrael. Blessed is he who kept his promise to the Jewish people, meaning the promise of the Bris Bein HaBesarim. Ech Ka'amar Hacha, even though that's true, how can we say here in the Vihisha Amda paragraph, the Osa Haftacha Amda Lavosenu Velanu, that promise that Hashem made at the Bris Bein HaBesarim was fulfilled not only at the time of Yetzias Mitzrayim, but also has taken the Jews and many later years out of different goluyos, out of many different exiles, and continues to be a promise that we can rely on now in our own days to bring the end of our golus. The Ech Yitzur Shebishvil Havtachos Bein HaBesarim, how is it possible that the promise that was made at the bris bein habesarim to Avram Avinu, asher kvar niskayma b'yitzias Mitzrayim, that was already fulfilled at the time of the Exodus from Egypt, anachnu nitzolim hayom hazeh, that we're still going to be saved by that promise today in our own time. So just to understand the question of the Barbanel, that from the Sefer Zevach Pesach that the Zera Shimshon is starting with here. The question is that the Vehisha, the paragraph in the Haggadah clearly states that the promise that Hashem made to Avram at the bris bein habesarim not only led to the Jewish people being redeemed and rescued from Mitzrayim, but it also stood by for the Jewish people, stood the Jewish people in good stead, and allowed them to survive and escape from exiles experiences after the Yetzias Mitzrayim, and even today we can rely on that promise to ultimately bring an end to our very long and dark exile. So how the Barbanel says, how is that possible? If you look at the psukim, it doesn't seemingly say anything about future exiles. Uledidan lo kasha klal. Zera Shimshon says, according to our understanding, this is no problem. Shehare b'ma'amad bein habesarim, because at the event of the bris bein habesarim, the covenant of the pieces, as it's called in Parshas Lech Lecha, Herelo HaKadosh Baruch Hu LaAvraham, Hashem showed to Avraham, Kol ha'arba malchuyos. Hashem showed Avraham all four of the kingdoms that were going to subjugate and subdue the Jewish people and exile them from their land in their later history, after the Yetzias Mitzrayim. So Hashem did not just tell Avraham about the Jewish people going into exile in Mitzrayim and ultimately coming out of that exile. He also told Avraham and communicated to Avraham about their four future experiences of exile after that. Kemosha Amru b'Medrash, as it says in the Medrash Rabbah, and here we have some of the words of the psukim we looked at. Vehine ema chashecha, and behold, there was a fear of the darkness, and let's just add in the words, interpolate in the words from the pasuk. Vehine ema chashecha gedola nofelis alav, and behold, there was a great fear of the darkness that fell upon Avraham. So the Medrash Rabbah says, ema, when it uses the word fear, zo bavel, this is a reference to the Babylonian exile. Chashecha, the word darkness, zomadai, this is a reference to the Median/Persian exile, v'chule, etc. And again, just to add in the missing words, to interpolate in the words that the Zera Shimshon took out here, when it says Gedola, the Medrash Rabbah says it refers to the Greek exile, and when it says Nofelis alav, fell upon Avram, that's an allusion to the Roman exile, which we still are in today. So it started with the destruction of the second Beis HaMikdash in the year 70 CE and continues until our own time. The Kain, and if so, meaning if Hashem alluded to and communicated to Avram about all of the future Golios, the exiles that the Jewish people were going to experience, if Hashem did that at the bris bein habesarim, as is stated here in the Medrash Rabbah, then bevadai sheba'osa havtacha, then certainly when Hashem made a promise, Hivtiach la'Avraham lahatzilenu, and he promised Avram that the Jewish people would be saved from their exiles, Shaycha l'chol hageulos. It is relevant. It refers to all of the different redemptions from these different exiles. So the Zera Shimshon says there's a very straightforward answer to the question of the Abarbanel. And the answer is that once we know from the Medrash Rabbah that Hashem at the bris bein habesarim alluded to Avram and communicated to him not just about what the future enslavement of the Jewish people in Mitzrayim, but also the four future exiles to Bavel and Persia and to Greece and to Rome, But also Hashem therefore included that just as Hashem was promising to redeem and rescue the Jewish people from Egypt, so too he would redeem them from the other 4 exiles as well. So it makes perfect sense to know that the promise, to understand that the promise that Hashem made applies not just applied not just at the Yetzias Mitzrayim, but can apply to the other exiles and also continues to apply today. Omnam b'derech acher, however, there is a whole other approach. Novo ledayik divrei hamagid, and for this new approach that the Zera Shimshon is going to offer, we need to come and to examine closely the words of the Magid, meaning the Baal HaHaggadah, the words of the author of the Haggadah. Shelo echad bilvad omad aleinu ela shebachol dor vador omdim aleinu v'chulei. So the Zera Shimshon quotes again from the words from the Vihisha Amda paragraph, where it said, not only one enemy will rise against us, but in each generation, in all the generations, they rise against us. V'koshe, we need to realize that there's a difficulty here. The mabetza imiya echad omed aleinu o rabin. What is the benefit to the Jewish people if they have a single enemy, or if they have many enemies? The Adarabah, actually just the opposite of what seems to be the meaning of the Vihisha Amda, Nira sheyoser tov hayolanu imiya echad levad. It seems that it would be better for the Jewish people to have one enemy, v'lo sheyu rabim, and not to have many enemies. The kavanas hamagid l'choirahi, and the apparent intent of the author of the Haggadah was apparently to say, should be shvil havtachaso, because of Hashem's promise, lo rotza sheyeh echad bilvad omed aleinu. Hashem did not want, since Hashem made a promise to rescue us from our exiles, he did not want us to have one enemy, elarabim, but rather many enemies. So keep that point in mind. Zera Shimshon is saying that according to a literal and simple understanding of the Vihisha Amda, it looks like that because Hashem made a promise to rescue us and to maintain us through our exiles and to ultimately rescue us from each of our exiles, that because of that promise, he wanted us to have not one enemy, but many enemies. The Ode, and another question that needs to be asked on the Vihisha Amda is, he should have ended his words with the following: but rather many stand against us. And why does it say, instead of saying and many rise up against us, it says and in each generation, in every generation they rise up against us. Because what is the connection or the relevance of the phrase in every generation, hacha, here in the Vihisha Amda? So let's explain this second question that the Zera Shimshon tells us we need to understand. The second question is, in the Vihisha Amda, think about the words. It says, Shelo echad bilvad omad aleinu. Not only one enemy stood against us, but rather, and think about what it should say, but rather many enemies stood against us. Not just one, but rather many. But that's not what it says. What it says is not just one enemy stood against us, but in every generation, enemies have stood against, have risen up to attack the Jewish people. So the Zera Shimshon says that doesn't seem to parallel. That doesn't seem to be consistent. It should have said, instead of one, there have been many. And rather, instead of saying that, it says, instead of one, there have been enemies in every generation. So clearly, there are some things going on in the Vihisha Amda paragraph that the Zera Shimshon is bothered by. And he has already told us that if we can answer those questions and understand the Vihisha Amda paragraph in a deeper way, then we'll also be able to come back and show how the Zevach, original Zevach Pesach question from the Avar Benel also is no problem, and we'll have a new way of answering that question. Last paragraph on this page. Omnam, however, kfar hochachnu b'sedarim u'b'drushim hakodmin. We have already established in previous parshios and in previous drushes on the different parshios, She'im hayu Yisrael misakvim b'Mitzrayim. If the Jewish people had been held in Egypt, ad tashlam ha'arba meo shana, until the completion of 400 years, lo hayu mishta'avodim od b'golius acheros. They would not have had to undergo, and they would not have had to suffer and endure through future exiles. We've seen that before in our own learning of the Zera Shimshon. We've seen him make that statement before, that because the Jewish people left Mitzrayim before the 400 years that are talked about in the Bris Bein HaBesarim, before that 400 years had elapsed, because they left early, so to speak, they had to suffer and undergo future experiences of exile. And since they left before the set time, they were required to return in the future to exile experiences. So their requirement, so to speak, to undergo exile was not fulfilled by the Golus Mitzrayim, by the exile in Egypt, because the full 400 years did not elapse. So they had to, they were rescued from Egypt and came out and were led to Eretz Yisrael, but then once they were in Eretz Yisrael, there were future exile experiences that they were forced to undergo. And Hashem redeemed them from Mitzrayim in a hurry, meaning before the 400 years were up, Hashem took them out. Because in Mitzrayim, the Jewish people had already reached the 49th level of impurity. And if they had stayed there and reached, and even lower, and had reached the 50th level of impurity, God forbid, they might never have been able to be saved. The Jewish people might never have been able to be rescued from Mitzrayim had they stayed longer and sunken down to the 50th level of impurity. But since they were, and therefore, since they were at the 49th, the last level they could be at before they reached the absolute bottom of the impurity barrel, so to speak, before they reached the 50th level of impurity, Hashem took them out of Egypt quickly. And there's a difficulty with this. She'im machmas tsar hagolus, if it was because of the suffering and the pain of Golus and Mitzrayim, nichnasu b'mem tesharei tuma, that's what caused them to enter the 49th level of impurity. So in the end, af begolius acherim efshar sheyavu lahem kach. Then when they experience future exiles, the same thing could happen. So what did Hashem do to help them, so to speak, when he solved their problem by taking them out of Mitzrayim? Let's think about that for a moment. The Zera Shimshon is saying, if they had reached the 49th level of tomb of impurity in Mitzrayim, and therefore Hashem had to rush to take them out because any more time spent in Golus might have brought them all the way down to the 50th level, and then they would have been unsavable. Hashem would not have been able to take them out, so to speak. Then how did it help to bring them out and but to tell them, I'm bringing you out now, but you're going to experience future Golios? Well, when they experience future Golios, that still might bring them right back down to the 50th level. So what's being accomplished? Either way, they're at risk of going down to the 50th level, whether it happens right now in Mitzrayim or it happens in one of the future Golios, one of the future exiles. And if you say, oh, well, the future exiles were not so long, they didn't spend such long periods of time when they were exiled in the future. For example, the exile into Bavel was only lasted for 70 years, etc. So you see, it's not so terrible, it's not so long. If you think that might be an answer to the question, isn't it true? Golus zeh, this exile that we are presently in, ba'avonosenu harabim, because of our many sins, hu yoser me'elef v'sof kuv shana, it has lasted more than 1,000 1,500 years. At the time of the Zera Shimshon, he could count more than 1,500 years that the Jews had been exiled since the Churban Bayis Sheni, since the destruction of the second Beis Hamikdash. Of course, we are now several centuries later, and that many more years later, and we're still suffering from the same exile and waiting and hoping for Mashiach to come. So the Zera Shimshon says that's not an answer to the question. So there must be, so that is another problem that the Zera Shimshon has raised. So let's continue. V'yesh lomar, and we can say, the Amrin of a Perek Ches Pesachim. We say in the 8th chapter of Maseches Pesachim, and here the Gemara quotes a pasuk from Sefer Shoftim, Tzidkos Pirzono b'Yisrael. In the context of that pasuk, of the context of Sefer Shoftim, that pasuk means that Hashem has done righteous or charitable acts for the open cities b'Yisrael, in the land of Israel. That's what the pasuk means. However, we're going to see that the Gemara is going to read the pasuk a little differently, and instead of reading the word Pirzono, the Gemara is going to read as if it says Pizrono. So we continue. Tzedakah asa HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Hashem showed mercy, Hashem showed charity to the Jewish Im Yisrael, with Bnei Yisrael, Shepizron, that he scattered them levein ha'umos, amongst the nations of the world. So the Gemara in Pesachim takes, again, this pasuk in Shoftim, and says that if we look at the middle word in the Tzidkos Pirzono b'Yisrael, if we look at that middle word, and instead of reading it Pirzono, we read it Pizrono, then the pasuk can be teaching us a whole new idea, which is that Hashem showed tzedakah to us when he scattered us amongst the nations of the world. Now, how is that a charitable act, to scatter the Jewish people all around the world? And the Gemara is going to continue. Because since the Jews are scattered all around the world, the non-Jewish enemies don't know what to do with us. Because if there's an enemy of the Jews that wants to destroy all of them, they are not with him, meaning the Jews are scattered all over the world. So if you have, God forbid, an enemy of the Jewish people who wants to wipe them out, that enemy, it can only be in one place in the world, and nobody has power, no ruler, no matter how great, has power over the whole world. That's never happened in human history. So the most that an enemy of the Jewish people can do is harm, God forbid, the Jews in his area, in his country, and his under his authority, under his control. But he can't harm all of the Jews, God forbid. He can't, God forbid, destroy all of the Jews, because they are not under his authority. They're spread out around the world. So that is a chesed for the Jews. And the Gemara continues. Lichlu mai di'ika gabayhu. So let's say this enemy of the Jews says, okay, I can't kill all the Jews everywhere. I can't eliminate all of them. I'm just going to try and wipe out the ones who are in my under my control. Karule malchusa ketiosa. So then the other nations of the world will call that ruler a kingdom of genocide, or a kingdom of murderers. In other words, since the Jews are spread all around the world, they will be able, in all of the other countries where they're not being attacked, to raise a hue and cry, to raise up the word, to spread the news about the terrible atrocities being committed in the country where they are being persecuted. And that will bring the nations of the world to make accusations against the country that is persecuting its Jews. Ubehasaliku, ubehanachtu. And with this, they extend their hands, and with this, they retract and pull back their hands, meaning that the nations of the world who would like to attack the Jews, the enemies of the Jewish people, they have to keep going back and forth between, well, we can't possibly kill all of them, so let's kill some of them. But if we kill some of them, the other nations of the world are going to accuse us and to malign us. And so they go back and forth on this question. And therefore, it's a chesed, it's a tzedakah, it's a kindness and a charity to the Jewish people that God, when he did send us into exile, he sent us and spread us throughout the world, as opposed to having the Jews go to just one place and then being under the power of one ruler. And God forbid, if that ruler would turn against them, they would all be under his authority. So that's not a situation that would have been in the best interest of the Jewish people. Ve'im Kahn, and if so, Shapir Ka'amar Hamagid. Now we understand how much sense it made when the Baal Haggadah says, Shelo echad bilvad oman aleinu lechalosenu. There is not one ruler who is able to rise up and destroy us. She'im haya omid aleinu echad bilvad, because if there had been just one person who had complete control over the Jews, hayinu b'sakona gedola, then the Jews would have been in great danger. That's an exceedingly dangerous situation for the Jewish people if all of them are in one place under the control of one ruler. However, ata now shehem rabim, now that we have many enemies, meaning that Jews are spread out all over, and we don't just have one person out to get us, we have many different places where Jews are, and in those different countries, people hate them. But the point is, they're spread out all over. Einom yicholim lamod aleinu. No one ruler can stand up against them and try and destroy all of them. And this is the real meaning, or the deeper meaning of it, the promise of Hashem. It has stood for us and for our forefathers and for us. Since in the other exiles after Egypt, the Jews were spread out, there's another benefit, which is it's impossible for all of them to sink, meaning to sink down to the lowest level of impurity, to the 50th level, which was not the case in the exile to Egypt. All of them were gathered in one place. All of the Jewish people in the world were in Mitzrayim at the time that the Jews were enslaved there, and they all were experiencing the same terrible suffering, and therefore the nation as a whole was dropping down to the lowest level and was in danger of dropping down to the 50th level of Tumah. However, in the other Galios, the other exiles that came afterwards, they were spread out, and therefore they would have different experiences in different places, and they would not the whole Jewish people would not be in danger of falling down to the 50th level of Tumah. U'begolus Bavel, and regarding the Golus Bavel, when the vast majority of Jews did leave Eretz Yisrael and get exiled to one place, to Babylonia, to Bavel, Lo yeshvu ki im shivim shana, they were only dwelled there for 70 years, meaning that because they were in one place, Hashem knew that they were in great danger, either because the leader of Bavel had all the Jews under his control, or because the Jews in one place might all sink to the lowest level of Tumah, the 50th level. So because of that, Hashem in his tzedakah, Hashem in his righteousness and his mercy and kindness made it a short Golus, and we were only there for 70 years. But in the future exiles after the Golus Bavel, the Jews were spread out in many, many countries and many, many different places, and ultimately the Jews spread out around the whole world. And so therefore, they no longer were at risk of two dangers that the Zera Shimshon has explained for us. They were not in danger of being under the control of a single ruler who, if he wanted to destroy them, would have all the Jews under his control, God forbid. And number two, they were not all in one place and all experiencing the same exact circumstances, which could have led them to drop down to the 50th level of Tumah and then be unsavable. That did not happen because they were in different places. And in some places, they could observe the Torah and do mitzvahs without a problem. And therefore, the danger of assimilating and going down to the 50th level of Tumah would only apply perhaps in some areas, but not in other areas. So the Zera Shimshon says, and now let's come back to our question about why did it say not just one enemy rose against us, but in every generation enemies rise against us, as opposed to saying not just one, but many. V'lo b'chol umma v'umma. It says in every generation, but not in every nation, in every country. Why didn't it say that? because sometimes you have a nation that is more cruel than its neighboring nation, than another nation. K'dei amrinon, as we say in Masechta Gittin, I betulcha, o betula de bar Esav. Over there, the Gemara is quoting one of the members of Chazal who experienced oppression at the hands of the Babylonians. And he said, this rabbi, this Amora said, either I said to Hashem, either let us be in your shade, meaning you protect us, Hashem, and don't let us be under the control of any foreign nation, or Betula de bar Esav, or let us be under the control of the descendants of Esav, right? As opposed to under the control of the Babylonians. So he was saying the Babylonians at that time were even crueler than the descendants of Esav, which means Rome, which is a reference to the Roman Empire. So the Gemara says, how could someone ever say they want to be under Roman control when the Romans were known as the most oppressive regime? So the Gemara answers, when we talk about either wanting to be under Roman control and Babylonia being worse or Babylonia being better, so those references, some of those references, refer to before the Persians came to Bavel. Chavre is a reference to the Persians. Halabasar the Asu Chavre, and some reference are to after the Persians came to Bavel. What this means is that the Persians were exceedingly cruel, and after they dominated Bavel and took control there, it was terrible for the Jews in Bavel, and therefore, even though being under the Roman Empire would have been better. However, before the Persians came and dominated Babylonian society, then it would have been better to be in Bavel because the Roman oppression was worse than the Jewish experience in Bavel. So the Gemara is explaining how different times in different areas, the level of oppression changes. It's not clear that they're doing this sometimes specifically because of their hatred for the Jews, but it's out of their cruelty. Sometimes a nation shows worse oppression to the Jews, not specifically because they hate the Jews more than another nation. They may be equally hated by a different nation, but this particular nation is by its teva, is by its nature a crueler nation and a more barbaric nation, and therefore sometimes it's better to be in one place, if for the Jews to be in one place rather than a different place. The Odam Rinon, and we also say, Ra'ain she'ein Yisrael yecholin lekabel gezeros romaim amad v'higlos am lebavel. We say, Chazal say that Hashem saw that the Jews could not withstand being under the subjugation of the Romans, and therefore he exiled them to Bavel, to Babylonia. So there you have a clear statement that the oppression of the Romans was worse and more barbaric than living under the Babylonians. And so the Zera Shimshon is showing us that because different places and different nations in the world treated the Jews differently at different times, that's what the Baal Haggadah is referring to when it talks about B'chol Dor Vador, in every generation. Hashem's promise saves us, meaning in every generation there are different places and different nations that are more cruel to the Jews, and Hashem's promise saves us to either be not under those people's control when it's the worst situation for the Jews there, or if under their control, at least not all of the Jews are under the worst nation's control. And that's why the author of the Haggadah specifically wrote, in every generation, it wants to teach us an additional teaching that based on the actions of a particular generation, even a nation that is not normally cruel, Omedes Aleinu, could stand against us, rise up against us, Lachalosenu, to destroy us. Kede Amrinon, as the Gemara in Yevamos says, Ein Poronos Bola Olam. punishment does not come to the world, Ela bishvil Yisrael, except because of the Jewish people. V'odi amrinu b'perek Tolin, and we also say in a Gemara and Masechta Shabbos, Ibotle Yehiri, if the arrogant people amongst the Jews would be nullified, if those arrogant people would stop acting in an arrogant way, Botle Amgushe, then the heretics of the world would be nullified, meaning that if the Jewish people cleaned up their own act and the arrogant ones among us stopped being arrogant, then there wouldn't be heretical people amongst the non-Jews who would be out to punish us. And the Gemara continues, Ibotle Dayone, if the corrupt judges amongst the Jewish people would be gotten rid of, if that no longer was a phenomenon amongst Klal Yisrael that there were corrupt judges, Budli Gazir Pate, then the corrupt rulers who oppressed the Jews amongst the nations of the world would be nullified. So the Zera Shimshon is showing us, based on this Gemara, that in every generation, it is because of the actions of that generation, meaning of the Jews in that generation, that they are treated the way they are treated. Ubi Yevamos gozru al habosar mipnei hamatonos. The Gemara in Yevamos continues this idea and says that the non-Jewish authorities made gezeros against kosher meat because the Jews were lax about giving the gifts of meat that they were supposed to give to the Kohen. They didn't follow the laws when they slaughtered meat of giving certain parts of the meat as gifts to Kohanim. And so because of that, the non-Jewish rulers and authorities made laws against kosher shlita, against slaughtering meat in a kosher way. Gozru al ha-mirchatzaos, then they made decrees against the bathhouses, and they started closing down the bathhouses in the Jewish communities, mipnei hatfilah, because Jews were being lax about immersion in the mikvah. Kamechatete shechave, and they started digging up Jewish graves. It's not just a modern problem, but even back in antiquity, there were times when the non-Jewish authorities showed complete disregard and disrespect to Jewish cemeteries, and they would say, "We want to use this land," and they would dig up the Jewish bodies. That they dig up the graves and they dig up the bodies, and they'd say, "Okay, we're going to get rid of the bodies, and now we're going to put a highway through here, or we're going to build a building here." Why? And that was because the Jews at that time were celebrating on the non-Jewish holidays, as opposed to avoiding the non-Jewish holidays and not taking note of them, and certainly not celebrating on them. Because the Jews celebrated the non-Jewish holidays, they suffered through the desecration of their synagogues by the authorities. Va'afal pichein, and even so, meaning even though there are all kinds of enemies to the Jewish people that exist in all kinds of different places and in all kinds of different generations, and even though it's the actions of the Jews themselves that can sometimes make us deserving of certain kinds of punishments at the hands of the non-Jewish nations, even so, HaKadosh Baruch Hu matzilenu miyadam, Hashem saves us from their hand in every generation and in every situation, shelo yochlu osanu, that the non-Jewish nations of the world, no matter their power and enmity, will never be able to eliminate us, will never be able to destroy, God forbid, the Jewish people. Very, very interesting piece. It gives us a whole set of different insights into the Vihisha Amda, and something to look forward to at our Seder table. Wishing everyone a good Yantif. Yasher Koach for joining us this week in the learning of the Zera Shimshon, and God willing, we'll learn in the Zera Shimshon again next week during the Pesach holiday.